today's video, I'm going to talk to you about a superpower that billionaires tap into that no one talks about and no one wants to do. It's the true separator between the people that win at a major level and the people that lose their entire lives. So stick around, you're going to get it. In 1985, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. The Apple computer became a household operating device. Everybody knew about it. Steve had a falling out with some of the board of directors. They didn't like the way that he was carrying themselves. They thought he was arrogant. They thought he was obnoxious. They thought he was a bad guy. And so eventually they voted him out and he was let go. For 11 years, Apple went down. Microsoft, their main competitor, surpassed them, started to become the most popular operating system in history at the time, and the Apple computer became extremely obsolete. 11 years later, in 1996, Apple reached back out to Steve Jobs, begging him to come back to work for the corporation and lead them to where they needed to go. Steve Jobs agreed to take the job at Apple for a salary of $1 a year in exchange for massive amounts of Apple stock, which had been bottomed out in the stock market index for quite a while, for the last 11 years. Steve Jobs came back to Apple, brought innovation, hired amazing technicians, hired amazing engineers, and created the iPod. When they released the iPod, it was a revolutionary musical device. It was an MP3 player, for those of you that weren't around back then, that allowed you to listen to all the songs anytime you wanted to on a device that fit in the palm of your hand. A few years later, Apple released the iPhone, which is the most popular smartphone of all time still today. So what was that lesson that Steve Jobs had to learn? And what was that superpower that he had to embrace in order to send Apple stock to be literally the first company to ever hit $1 trillion? That stock went from rock bottom to a meteoric soar because of the new products that they put out there. That lesson was real simple, but oftentimes overlooked and oftentimes ignored by the normal person. That lesson is personal responsibility. You see, Steve had an understanding that he had made some mistakes, that he had handled some of the board directors wrong, that he'd handled some of the circumstances wrong, that he had let his ego get in the way and his arguments get in the way of the job and the company that he was the head of and was dedicated to build. So for 11 years, Steve enjoyed his money, he enjoyed his private life, but he felt unfulfilled. He felt that he needed to take the company that he started in the direction that he wanted to, knowing that he handled it all wrong. So what did Steve do? If you've read any books about him, if you watched any movies, he had to go through the process of accepting personal responsibility, knowing that everything that happens to us or for us or against us is our fault somehow. So many people, they don't want to do that. They want to make excuses. Oh, it's this person's fault, or this circumstance's fault, or this entity's fault, or these people's fault. And because of that, they never learn the lesson that they need to learn in order to get better. You see, when Steve Jobs learned the lesson that he needed to learn, he came back with a better attitude. He came back with a humble mentality. And he came back and led Apple to meteoric rise in not only the company and the production and the products that they put out, but in the stock price as a reflection of those things. You see, oftentimes as leaders, especially of corporations, especially if you started with like a single member LLC or you were self-employed and built it up into a corporation, something happens, you get bad employees, you get bad middle management, you get an accountant that runs off with your money, you start blaming everybody else. But the truth is, when we accept personal responsibility and realize that everything that happens to us, for us, against us is within our control, and we have to take the responsibility of that lesson, because when you give an excuse, somebody else gets the responsibility. Some third party gets the responsibility, therefore they get the lesson. See, when you make excuses, you're missing out on lessons. When you take responsibility, you're gathering the lesson, and therefore you can improve because of the wisdom that comes with the lesson. See, Elon Musk is another great example of this. In 2000, he was fired from PayPal. Again, problems with his ego, problems with the board of directors. They didn't see eye to eye, and he was voted out and let go. You see, Elon Musk, he could have went out there, and I'm sure he did in the beginning, because it's natural human tendency to point fingers and blame everybody else. But instead, he moved on to the next venture. He moved on to create Tesla Motors. And Tesla Motors is now today the #1 selling car on the market, more than GM, more than Ford, more than Toyota. See, he had to go through a personal development phase to where he took responsibilities for his actions that caused him to lose the job at PayPal in order to gain the wisdom and the lessons to go on and lead a company much bigger than PayPal, AKA Tesla. So right now, if you're running a business and times are hard, or maybe somebody did you wrong, or maybe there's just something in your marriage, maybe there's something with your children, maybe there's some friends that are doing you wrong, you're never gonna get the lesson. You're never gonna have the superpower to overcome anything unless you take personal responsibility. You see, for myself, in 2017, I had 110 clients paying $25,000 a year. I got into an argument with 2 of those clients and they went on a crusade against me and I lost 100 clients. See, in about a 60-day period, I went from making millions to making tens of thousands again. About 90 days prior to this happening, I had booked a hotel room for 120 people at a nice hotel in Denver, Colorado. I'd paid for it, I'd paid for the food, I'd paid for the AV, I paid for the stage. And then I had this huge falling out. I showed up at the event and there were maybe 10 people there. 2 of them, maybe even 3 of them were my employees. So these people were expecting to come to this giant event with 120 people or so, and then they were the only 10 people in the room. Talk about a humbling moment in my life. Going from, in my little world, being on top of the world and having all these amazing clients to almost having nothing. But what happened was at that event, I had a choice. I could blame the 100 people who quit and went with the other 2 members. I could blame the world around me and get mad at everybody else. Or I could take personal responsibility and wonder what I did to cause this, what situations I handled wrong, how I could handle them better, and how I could grow from this situation. That's exactly what I did. I remember on the plane ride back from Denver, I was telling my wife, I'm a complete failure. I can't even believe those people sat through 2 days of listening to me when 100 other people didn't show up. What an idiot I am, and what a massive amount of embarrassment. And my wife looked at me and she said, but what did you learn? Well, I learned not to fight with clients. I learned that I shouldn't have cussed at them, to be honest with you. I should have handled it better. I learned that I can't count on people to believe my side of the story if I'm not a trustworthy, creditable source to give my side of the story. So how can I be more trustworthy? I created core values like integrity, responsibility, service, excellence. I created myself, you know what, I'm never gonna be put in this situation again. And how am I gonna avoid this situation? I'm gonna pour into people and lead them better as opposed to police them and correct them. I went on over the next 2.5 years to add 2,100 people into that same program. Some of them as low as $5,000 a year. Most of them as high as $30,000 to $40,000 a year. The biggest years of my life were ahead of me. I could have easily put my head in the sand and said, everybody's mean to me and they sold me out. But the second that I took personal responsibility, in my little world, I went on my own Steve Jobs meteoric rise to taking my company back and becoming a better leader. So whatever you're out there facing right now, you're facing it because there's a lesson to be learned. And that first lesson is take personal responsibility. You created the situation, whether you like it or not. The second lesson is how can you avoid that in the future? And the third and most important lesson is how can you improve from it? And if you'll adapt that superpower mindset in your way of thinking, your life will absolutely transform and your meteoric rise in your empire is right in front of you.